Hi, everybody. Just so you know, we are on video as well as audio. So if you're only listening and want to watch, go to friendstalkmoney.org and click on the video link, and then you can see our happy, shiny faces. So now we're going to talk about today's episode's topic. Many people in their 50s or 60s want to start small businesses, and many others already have. But the government is doing a few things and planning to do a few others that are making things harder if you want to launch a business or already have one. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, Friends Talk Money is not a political podcast, but when the government has new policies and programs that change things that affect our audience, we feel we really have to talk about it. So that's what we're doing. And we have a special guest today. That's Hedy Ratner. We're going to introduce her in just a minute. She's got a lot of expertise about small businesses and especially women-run businesses. Before we get into the bad news for entrepreneurs, due to all those changes by the Trump administration and Congress, I thought we could talk a little bit about why it is that so many older Americans want to be their own bosses. So, Terry and Pam, any thoughts about why that's happening?
Well, I think many Americans who are in that situation don't really have a choice. They have a lifetime of skills and experiences, and for one reason or another, they're downsized from their company. They're not going to sue them for age discrimination. Instead, they take a positive step forward and think, look, I have all these skills. I'll start my own consulting business, or I'll get my kids involved and start a business, or the other people that left the job with me, we could set up our own shop. And so it's a viable alternative for bridging the gap between when you leave that lifetime job and you really want to stop earning money. Small business is a great opportunity. I'm a little disturbed by what's going on.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. Pam, any thoughts about why we're seeing so many older entrepreneurs these days?
Yeah, I'm not going to say why older Americans want to be small business owners because I am one of them. I've already done it.
Mhm.
So I'm speaking only for myself, and I'm going to tell you there are other reasons too. Deep inside, look, I know I have to take a huge risk, and I was willing to take that risk because number one, I know I'm qualified to start and run my own business that's in an area of my expertise. And so knowing that other business owners in my same age bracket, we seem to have a burning desire to pursue a passion. Okay, so that's the main driver for me and maybe a few others like me. And then the second reason for me, right behind passion, is to pursue ultimately what I want very selfishly. I want flexibility to manage my own time. At this point in my life and going forward forever, I want to own my schedule as much as I can. But I also know, as Terry said, that self-employed people, um, older than me or same age bracket or whatever, they're solving a problem by doing it and they're filling in that gap. And so these are three really big reasons that people like me decide later in life that we want to be entrepreneurs, we want to be small business owners.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, both of you. Before we get into what's making things a little harder for small business owners, I do want to say that that recent Big Beautiful Bill Act, I'm not crazy about the name, but that's what they call it, it did include a few tax breaks for entrepreneurs. And I'll also say that the Small Business Administration, the SBA, has begun assisting small manufacturers in a few new ways. So that's the good news. But I think those moves are overshadowed by a number of others from President Trump and from Congress. One of them is that the Trump administration wants to end funding for the SBA's 150 women's business centers and the Commerce Department's Minority Business Development Agency. So I think that's a good way for Terry to introduce Hedy Ratner, who knows a whole lot about that.
Hedy Ratner knows everything about it. If you're watching, I hope you are, meet my good friend, my longtime dearest friend, Hedy Ratner. She's an activist. She's been an advocate forever for women's rights and civil rights. But Hedy created 40 years ago, co-created something called the Women's Business Development Center in Chicago. It was the first women's business assistance program in the United States. It now serves 9 states with 7 offices throughout the Midwest region. WBDC, oh, by the way, I've been on the advisory board for about ever, has served over 100,000 clients in the Midwest, developing and supporting the success of women and minority-owned businesses through counseling, training, financial education, certification, procurement assistance in not only in English, by the way, in Spanish, and also develop women-owned businesses for childcare. I mean, it's just a vital, vibrant organization. And Hedy, this is not political. Hedy has been recognized. She started out as an assistant school superintendent for Cook County, that's Chicago. She became the first assistant commissioner of education under President Carter when he formed the Department of Education, which is now sort of going away. Later, she served on the National Women's Business Council under both President Reagan and President Clinton. She's been honored by presidents of both political parties, and every governor in Illinois has had her on every advisory committee that ever existed. And I'm really, really proud. Hedy's my friend, and we talk all the time. And Hedy, I'm going to turn it over to you because I know you are boiling upset, with good reason, by what's happening to small businesses now.
It's a tragedy. The growth of women and minority-owned businesses and the growth of small businesses, it was as a result of the Small Business Administration and the various initiatives that it established to help women, to help minorities, to help small businesses. In fact, one of the organizations that existed long before we existed was SCORE, the Senior Corps of Retired Executives, which was all volunteers, had minimal funding from the federal government, and it's now been canceled. And that was where most business owners went when they were looking for help and mentors and support. That's gone. The SBA is essentially will be gone. They're eliminating over 50% of their employees. They've closed the Chicago office. In fact, interestingly, they've closed the offices in all blue states, not in red states, but in all blue states, which was appalling to me. The SBA was the first funder of the Women's Business Development Center. We convinced Jim Thompson at the time, who was the governor, to support our organization as a small business development center. We convinced the SBA that a small business development center targeted to women and minorities would have an enormous economic impact because there hadn't been any program supporting women and minority-owned businesses until the SBA established it, and then the Minority Business Development Agency that Richard mentioned also. The SBA, we were the first women's business assistance center supported by the Small Business Administration as a small business development center. There are now, as Richard mentioned, over 150. Well, many of those centers have already closed because their federal funds were totally cut. Some of the organizations that might have been a little bit larger are existing, but they're treading water at this point. And not all states and counties and cities have been as supportive of small minority and women-owned businesses, especially in some rural areas and smaller cities that don't have the resources and the tax base. So yes, I am, and also the National Women's Business Council, which was a council that met and reported to the president and to Congress, has been eliminated. So the SBA essentially is not even half of what it was. They've eliminated all the initiatives that, as President Trump describes as woke, anything to do with women, minorities, people of color, people with disabilities, lost all funding. And that puts the whole city and country and state in a terrible position because of the economic impact of businesses. I wanted to add to what Pam and Richard had said about older adults. There's a category called encore entrepreneurs. What people don't know is the rate of new entrepreneurship is often highest among Americans between the ages of 45 and 64. More than half of all businesses are owned by women, people 55 and older. And as you said, some out of necessity or after being laid off or motivated by a desire to do the things they love. But my concern is what's going to happen to the enormous impact that women and minority business owners have had on the economy. And it wasn't that long ago, 1979, where there was the beginning of the Office of Women's Business Ownership at the SBA. There was an awareness by Republican and Democratic presidents, all of the economic impact and possibilities for women and minority business owners to impact the economy as a whole and their communities. And so this is a disastrous direction that our economy is taking, and it's going to be very, very difficult to restore it. Hopefully we can. But what's interesting to me is that the number of women-owned businesses before all this happened increased in great part nationwide because of also not only increased access to technical assistance, which there are women's business development centers, small business development centers, all SBA in part supported. In 2020, 22.3%, or more likely close to 40% of all small businesses were women-owned. When we started the Women's Business Development Center, it was less than 10%. So that just tells you how the growth and what the impact has been. I was looking at numbers of percentages. Because of the enormous success of minority and women-owned business goals set by federal government, the state, the county, and the city, what that means is under federal guidelines, there were goals established for doing business with minorities and women. That's been eliminated. The procurement and expanded opportunities for women and minority-owned businesses and small businesses generally has been the greatest growth impact for women and minorities. And it's been fascinating to see how the corporations and local and state and county governments have all responded to those federal goals. We still have them in Illinois, we have them in the city, we have them in Cook County, they're in New York, they're in California, interestingly, blue states. So
Well,
that's a long answer.
thank you for all that, Hedy, and thanks for everything that you've done already to help women business owners. I want to have one small point of clarification. I did an article for MarketWatch about what we're talking about today, and I interviewed quite a few people about what's going on. One of the people I talked to was the CEO of SCORE, and what she said to me was that right now what's happening is that the Trump administration is asking Congress to eliminate federal funding for SCORE. It hasn't happened yet, but it looks like it's going to. But what she said to me was that doesn't mean the end of SCORE. It just means that SCORE won't have any federal money, and they're going to have to figure out how they can continue without federal money. She thinks they will, but it's going to be a very different SCORE organization. I want to talk about a few other things that are going on too out of Washington that are making things harder for small business owners. And one of them is those tariffs, those on again, off again tariffs. I was surprised to learn that 97% of US importers and exporters are small businesses.
Right.
And 51% of small business owners who were surveyed recently said that they are putting business decisions on hold until the trade policies become more certain. So the tariffs are really hurting people who have small businesses and want to start them. And I interviewed a Minnesota couple who run a bike shop. They told me that one of their suppliers raised every price immediately after the tariffs began. So they then started to raise their prices because they had to, and they've seen a slowdown in customer traffic in the stores.
It's what's interesting about tariffs is well, I wanted to talk also about job creation, but on tariffs, I was just looking at some statistics that as you said, Richard, so many of the businesses, the majority of all importing and exporting is by small businesses.
Hmm.
So
Right.
they are the ones that are going to be hurt the most.
Hedy,
Hmm.
I have a question. I just kind of wedge it in there if I could. I can't stop thinking about this part of it. Again, kind of focusing on people who are in their 50s or 60s who have already taken the leap to start and run a business. And they don't have time, we don't have time in the rest of our lives to do it all over again if it
Right.
fails, like somebody younger might when things go south. That means that the older small business owner needs not only, a really a good solid financial cushion underneath them, but they need to have, all of these resources, and they're taking risk at every turn. So if without these resources, okay, and so many business owners needing to put decisions like that about raising prices or not on hold because they know that if demand slacks, their business is going to their margins are going to be pressed. So Hedy, I'm curious, what do you think that older business owners, especially women, can and should do right now if they're trying to launch a new business in this environment during this volatile time? And let's use like an example of a retail store owner or a restaurant or even like a new online or a tech business that they have to protect themselves against shifting government policies and cuts, and tariffs. So, what would you say is some practical advice for people who are on the fence and thinking, they're just getting started and launching a business? Now their support cushion is going to be
Well,
reduced.
at the moment, this isn't the best time to start, but there still are many resources that older adults, as well as anyone else, can utilize, hopefully until that we continue our funding. But the Women's Business Development Center is in 9 states and in 7 cities in the Midwest. We provide the technical assistance, we provide the business opportunities, we provide the certification to help them do business with corporations and with government if it still exists. But the best thing, I mean, usually the older adults have the experience, as you mentioned at the beginning, the education, the experience, the knowledge to be more successful than some of the emerging businesses owned by young people today. Young people who haven't been able to find jobs. Instead, they look at small business and entrepreneurship as an alternative. So you start with a leg up, but you still need the technical assistance that is provided and help with access to capital. When we first started, most of our women-owned businesses used credit cards or family and friends for access to capital. But there were federal programs and initiatives that funded some of the community development loan funds, organizations like ourselves, and we worked with the banks to help them find additional funding so that they could start and expand the businesses. When we started, there wasn't a bank that was willing to help an emerging startup at all. Now they're looking at us as the financial institutions as a better risk. And I think older adults are also in a position that they're a better risk.
Hmm.
Do you think, Hedy, that with all this, no more diversity, no more
Yeah.
all that stuff, do you think corporations will no longer feel incented to use as suppliers, because your big annual suppliers fair went on for years, connected with purchasing departments with
We're
certified
not
small
doing it
business?
anymore.
No.
Interestingly, we are not doing it anymore.
Hmm.
Although I'm retired, I'm still involved. I'm on the board. We're not doing that anymore.
Why not?
Yes, the answer to I'm sorry. The answer to that is interesting. We're finding many of the corporations with whom we worked and who are providing minority and women business owners an opportunity to do business with them are still doing it. However, they don't want to be identified on
Oh,
websites, on materials. And again, that conference that would have
Hmm.
probably 60 corporations and government agencies there looking to do business with women and minorities don't want to be identified, don't want to be seen as part of it because they don't want the repercussions that have come from the Trump administration.
Uh, can I mention?
But many are still doing business with women and minorities because it's good business for them.
I want to mention a few other things that are happening at the SBA that I think our audience needs to know about. So the SBA itself is cutting its workforce by 43%, which is
Yes.
pretty dramatic. They're also making small business loans only to American citizens with Social Security numbers, regardless of whether immigrants who own the business have legal status. And they're also making it harder for some borrowers to qualify for the SBA loans because they've changed the rules on that too. So I guess I'm thinking, and this is a question for all three of you, you put it all together, what do you think the effects of all these things are going to mean for people in their 50s and 60s who either want to start small businesses or have already started them and want to grow them?
From my perspective, as I said before, it may not be the best time to start. But for those who have no choice, there are still resources they can call upon to help them with technical assistance and access to capital and opportunities with some of the businesses that are still doing business with women and minorities. It's um, we're in a very difficult circumstance now, and I don't see much of an outcome. I
Hmm.
also wanted to mention that when they talk about DEI, they don't really mention that minority and women-owned businesses are a major source of job creation,
A
outpacing
huge
the growth
engine.
of
Yeah.
businesses in general. Absolutely. And as of 2024, women-owned businesses employ an estimated 12.9 million workers. From 2019 to 2024, employment in women-owned businesses, remember the date is 2024, um, increased by 19.5%. And Black women-owned businesses saw employment increase by 44.4% from 2019 to 2024. But
Richard,
they don't talk about that.
well, let me give you a macro. You asked what the impact is. Now,
Yeah.
think about what Hedy's statistics mean. Think about the fact that these are people who are gainfully employed in their businesses and employ others to work for them. I love the business section that Women's Business did, developing home-based health childcare businesses, getting them certified. I mean, boy, that just grew like topsy. Okay, you can't get the resources and the help to do that. Now you have people who are dependent on benefits that are being cut, health insurance that is
Right.
being made more expensive, if not cut completely, food stamps and other programs that are being cut. At the same time, you're cutting the job engine for the people that wouldn't have to be relying on these things. At the same time, you're forcing small businesses to raise prices because the stuff they sell, so much of it is imported. Think about it. And they say, well, that won't impact inflation. And of course, it'll impact prices higher, sales lower, businesses closing, no resources for them. This, to me, okay, I'm going out on a limb here, is the most short sighted
I was
policy
just going to
for
say that.
economic growth that you could imagine. You're pulling the chair out from under people, the table and the rug at the same time, and these people could be productive members of contributing members to a growing economy.
I
So
was I was just going to say that, Terry, that Hetty, you guys, America's got 6 million, right, small business owners who are the backbone of job creation and innovation. And last I checked, driving something like 44% of economic growth. So that is the big question is, okay, so how can these cutbacks, and you can call them short-term fixes, anything you want, I want to be political. How can these cutbacks in the short run not create bigger economic weakness later? How can it not?
Yeah.
Well,
Terry, you mentioned health insurance. I want to mention one more thing about
yeah.
that as it relates to small business owners. The cost of health insurance and the availability of health insurance are likely to go up for a lot of small business owners. And one reason is that the Affordable Care Act's premium
Mhm.
subsidies that made it less expensive for people to afford health insurance through the Affordable Care Act, those are scheduled to expire at the end of 2025, and it looks like they are not going to be renewed after that. And then on top of that, you look at what's happening with Medicaid. The
Right.
Medicaid cuts are going to hurt some small businesses because I found that 1/3 of people on Medicaid earn their living at a small business or are family members or small business workers or owners. So people think of, people on Medicaid as being only the very oldest and the very poorest in America. There are a lot of people who are on Medicaid, and many of them are either at or family members of small businesses. And I guess I would go back to Pam and Terry and ask the question that Terry was asking Hedy before, which is, what advice would you offer somebody who's in their 50s or 60s and says, I still want to open a small business, or I've got one and I'm nervous about whether I'm going to be able to keep it running?
Oh, Richard, here's the one thing I always keep in mind. At the times when it really, and we've all lived a long, long time now. I mean, we're the grown-ups in the room. And at the times when it looked bleakest, economically and politically, and I mean, think back to the Vietnam War, the inflation of the late 70s. Think back before that, the House Un-American Activities Committee government, was that our government then? And those are the ones we've lived through. We've lived through the economic collapse of 2007, 2008, people losing their homes. America has always in the past managed to come through stronger, managed to come to its senses when things were controversial. And I just listened to Warren Buffett, never paid anyone to bet against America. So while we've given a catalog of kind of depressing circumstances, no matter what your politics are, the facts are,
Yeah.
the impacts are depressing in many ways, and they will depress our economy. I think that the spirit of America and Americans, and all of you who are listening and thinking, what advice are they going to give us? I think the only advice we can give you is, have faith, have hope, and keep marching forward, because we just can't give up on what made this country great.
God, that's so true. Uh, um, Because I think that the best thing that older entrepreneurs like myself can make sure that we do is that we really have to be hyper aware of building a really strong financial cushion, take that seriously.
Yes.
And we have to get serious about creating a really truly flexible financial plan for our lives, our retirement. Focus has to be on managing cash flow more now than ever, staying lean, being prepared to pivot if needed. Our experience is invaluable, but it's our ability to be adaptable and to be prepared for all of what goes away to support us, higher prices and headwinds. That's what's going to help us weather the storm and keep this whole dream alive. So I think it's like, we hear it almost like news, like it doesn't have anything to do with us. Oh, this is going to happen, that's happened, this policy. And it has everything to do with us. And that's how I see looking inward to protect ourselves as much as possible.
What you're saying echoes something I heard when I was doing this article for Market Watch. I interviewed David Deeds. He's an entrepreneurship professor at the University of St. Thomas in Minneapolis. And he said, because he thinks, just like Hedy was saying, that the odds of success are now a little bit lower for small business owners, that if you want to open a business, he said, you've got to build up more cash than you had planned to do. And he says that people in their 50s and 60s who want to become entrepreneurs, they're taking on some substantial risk at a time of their lives when they really don't have a lot of recovery time. So they really need to be conservative about doing this. But he also says nobody should let Washington stop them from trying to pursue their dreams. So I agree with that too. Before we close, Hedy, any last words you want to add?
I wanted to add something about immigrants, if I may.
Sure.
What was interesting to me, because I did a little research, that immigrants have a higher propensity for entrepreneurship than native-born Americans, as well as job creation as business owners. That's why I started the Women's Business Development Center, because I looked at the paradigm of immigrants coming to this country, like my parents, who started small businesses because they didn't have really understanding of the culture, of the language, and started a business because they couldn't get decent jobs to support their families. Immigrants now own nearly 1/5 of all employer businesses and almost a quarter of non-employer businesses. That's, one-person shop. Immigrants are active in starting new businesses, have started as much as 20 to 25% of all new businesses in recent years. They're creating the jobs, they are supporting our economy, and they are working in small businesses that allow small businesses to grow and succeed.
That's so
So,
true.
and my bottom line here is these are troubling times. I want to be optimistic. I'm having a hard time doing it. But as Terry said, never lose
That's right.
faith in the power of the American people. And I'm hoping to feel better about that sooner rather than later.
Well, I hope we'll have you back, Hedy, when there's better things to talk about, happier
Thank
things
you.
to talk about,
Thank
and
you.
some good news. And I'm hoping that's going to be soon. In the meantime, we will keep our audience posted on any other upcoming developments in Washington that might affect them and their finances. So thanks everybody for joining us today on Friends Talk Money, and we'll see you soon.
Bye.
Thank you. It's lovely
Bye.
to meet you.
Friends Talk Money is funded in part by a grant from the Investor Protection Trust. The IPT is a nonprofit organization devoted to investor education. Since 1993, the IPT has worked with the states to provide the independent, objective investor education needed by all Americans to make informed investment decisions. Visit investorprotection.org. We also receive support from the North American Securities Administrators Association, known as NASA. It's the oldest international investor protection organization. NASA's members include state and provincial securities regulators from the U.S., Canada, and Mexico who serve on the front lines of investor protection. Recognizing that education and awareness are powerful tools in the fight against investment fraud, NASA is pleased to sponsor Friends Talk Money. Here are 3 important tips to help you protect your money from fraud. With investing, there are always risks, so be cautious of anybody telling you that a certain investment is guaranteed. You should also proceed with caution if somebody is promising very large investment returns. This is a common red flag for investment fraud. Last and most importantly, be sure you're working with a licensed or registered financial professional. You can check your advisor and make sure they're licensed by visiting brokercheck.finra.org. NASA is your partner in keeping you safe and helping you avoid investment frauds. Visit nasa.org and click on the Investor Education tab to learn more.